Alright guys, today we are going to be talking about the 7 principles of the Constitution. Just to list them really quick, they're right down there on the bottom. Republicanism, separation of powers, limited government, popular sovereignty, federalism, checks and balances, and individual rights. And we're going to talk about each of these today. Now, what you need to understand is that a principle is a belief that is the foundation of the government. These are the 7 things that our country and government is really built on. They are the core beliefs of our country. Now, if you think of it like this, it's kind of like a bunch of building blocks. A government is built up by the way people believe a government should be ran. And the Constitution sets up these foundations or these building blocks. And we have 7 core beliefs that are like the building blocks for our country. So again, they are federalism, limited government, republicanism, separation of powers, popular sovereignty, checks and balances, and individual rights. So let's look at these in a little bit more in depth. First off, we have federalism. Now, federalism is the belief that the federal government and the state governments have separate powers, but they also share some powers. So check out this Venn diagram. On the left, you have national powers. So this is powers that only the federal government or national government can do. So these are only things that the president, Supreme Court, and our Congress can do. So maintain the military, declare war, establish a postal system, protect copyrights and patents, set standards for weights and measures. Those are all things that only the national government can do. Now on the far right are all the powers that only the state governments can do. So this is only like the state of Texas or the state of Kansas or the state of Missouri. These types of things are establish local governments, set up schools, regulate state commerce, that's money or business, make regulations for marriages, and establish and regulate corporations. So that's only the state powers. Now, powers that both the state and the national government share are stuff like collect taxes, establish courts, regulate interstate commerce, regulate banks, borrow money, punish criminals, provide for the general welfare. So this is called federalism. So as you can see, the national government has some powers that their very own. The state government have their own powers, that's their very own. And they also share some powers as well. This is called federalism. The second principle that the government is built on is the belief in a limited government. Now, remember in the last video, the founding fathers were inspired by the Magna Carta, and that is where we got this idea of being a limited government. The government can only do what the Constitution says. The Constitution is like a job description, and each branch of the government cannot do more than what their job description says. So they are limited by what the Constitution says. Therefore, we have a limited government. They can't just do whatever they want. The third principle or belief that the government is built on is republicanism. Now, republicanism is the power given to the people to vote and have a choice or a say in the way the government works. Citizens have a say. American people have a say in the government because we all elect our president and representatives. So we all have the power to vote for the president and vote for our representatives. So that means that we do have a say in what goes on in our country. The American people give the government its power through the people's consent. Now what that means is, the word consent means to vote and give permission. So when we vote for a president, we're giving that president the power that he needs to run our country. When we vote for a representative in our country, that means we're giving them the power to speak for us and to run the government. So really, the government gets its power from the people, and they get it by us voting. The fourth principle that our country is built on is the separation of powers. Now, in the Constitution created 3 separate branches of government: the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. Now remember the breakdowns. The legislative branch is Congress, and that's broken down more into the House of Representatives and the Senate. The executive branch is the president and the vice president. And the judicial branch is the Supreme Court and all the court systems in the country. All 3 branches have different powers. The Constitution is their job description, and they must do what that job description says, and they can't do somebody else's job description. They can't. The executive branch does their job, not the job of the legislator. The legislative branch does their job, not the job of the judicial branch. They all have separate powers. This is separation of powers. Now, the reason that we have separation of powers in the 3 branches is because there's also a process of checks and balances, and it's probably one of the greatest principles or core beliefs of our country. Basically, what checks and balances are is that each branch of the government has to ask the other branches for permission to act. So one branch, the president can't just do whatever he wants. He has to ask Congress if he can do certain things. Congress can't just do what they want. They have to ask the executive branch, the president, if they can do something. And the Supreme Court, they check both of them. The judicial branch looks at both of them and making sure that they're following the Constitution. Check out these examples. Let's look at the very top one between the legislative branch and the executive branch. So Congress, their job is to make our laws. So the House of Representatives and the Senate, they create new laws that might help our country. Well, after they make those new laws, they send it to the president. And the president can either accept that law and that bill, or he can veto it, which means decline it, cancel it, say no, and then it gets sent back to the legislative branch. That is a form of checks and balances. Now let's look at the bottom right one. The executive branch, the president has the right and the power to pick what judge he wants to be in the Supreme Court. But the courts can declare acts by the president unconstitutional. So if the president does something that doesn't match the Constitution, they can get mad at him and tell him he can't do that. That is a check and balance. So when one branch looks at what the other branch is doing and says they can or cannot do it, that is checks and balances. The sixth principle that is the foundation of our government is something called popular sovereignty. Now, popular sovereignty is the people's right to vote. It's government by the people. So as Benjamin Franklin said, in free governments, the rulers are the servants and the people their superiors or sovereigns. This means that the people have the right to vote and they give the power. So like in this, the Constitution allows the people to have the power by voting, not kings anymore. Our country is led by people voting. This is popular sovereignty. And last but not least, we have the seventh principle, which is our individual rights. We know these most assuredly as the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Now, individuals have rights that are protected by the government. These are listed in the Bill of Rights. These are our individual rights that are given to us by the government, and they cannot be taken away. So these are the 7 beliefs or the building blocks of our country. Without one of them, our country would be definitely way different, and it wouldn't be the same great country that it is today. So just in review, the 7 building blocks or beliefs, the core beliefs of our country are federalism, limited government, republicanism, separation of powers, checks and balances, individual rights, and popular sovereignty.